November 8th, 2019. A quiet suburban neighborhood in Riverside, California, was about to become the center of one of the most disturbing family tragedies in recent American history. But what happened that night wasn't just a crime. It was the final chapter of a story that had been building for years, hidden behind smiles, family dinners, and a facade of normalcy that would shatter in the most unimaginable way. In the early morning hours of November 8th, 2 police officers arrived at 2847 Maple Grove Drive. The house was dark except for a single light burning in an upstairs window. Detective Sarah Martinez and Officer James Cooper had responded to a frantic 911 call from a neighbor who reported hearing screaming coming from the Morrison residence. What they discovered inside would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The Morrison family had always seemed picture perfect. Richard Morrison, 52 years old, was a successful insurance broker who had built a comfortable life for his family. His wife, Patricia, 48, was a dedicated homemaker who volunteered at the local church and organized neighborhood events. Their daughter, Emily Morrison, 24 years old, had recently graduated from the University of California with a degree in psychology and had moved back home to save money while looking for her first job. But there was someone else in the Morrison household, someone who would change everything. Jennifer Hayes, Patricia's younger sister, had moved in with the family 6 months earlier after her own marriage fell apart. Jennifer was 43, struggling with depression and financial problems, and the Morrison family had welcomed her with open arms. It seemed like the Christian thing to do, Patricia had told her friends at church. Family takes care of family. What nobody knew was that beneath Jennifer's grateful smile and quiet demeanor, something dark was growing, a resentment so deep, so consuming, that it would eventually destroy everyone she claimed to love. The tension in the Morrison household had been building slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Jennifer had always lived in her older sister's shadow. Patricia was the successful one, the one who had married well, the one who had the perfect daughter and the beautiful home. Jennifer's life, by contrast, had been a series of failures and disappointments. Her marriage to David Hayes had lasted only 3 years before he left her for a younger woman, and she had no children, no career, no savings. And now at 43, she was living in her sister's guest room, dependent on their charity for every meal, every roof over her head. At first, Patricia and Richard were understanding. They knew Jennifer was going through a difficult time. They made space for her, included her in family activities, and tried to make her feel at home. But as weeks turned into months, small irritations began to surface. Jennifer would sleep until noon, leaving Patricia to handle all the household chores. She made no effort to find a job, claiming her depression made it impossible to work. She spent hours on her phone, scrolling through social media, watching her former friends live lives she could never have. Emily, meanwhile, was growing increasingly uncomfortable with her aunt's presence. Jennifer had begun making odd comments about how easy Emily's life was, how she had never had to struggle for anything, how she didn't appreciate what her parents had given her. The remarks were always delivered with a smile, but there was an edge to them that made Emily's skin crawl. One evening in late October, about 2 weeks before the tragedy, a conversation took place that would prove to be a turning point. The family was sitting down to dinner when Richard casually mentioned that they were thinking of taking a trip to Hawaii for Thanksgiving. Jennifer's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "All of us?" she asked. "Well," Richard said carefully, "we thought it might be nice for just the three of us this year. You know, a family vacation." The implication was clear. Jennifer wasn't included in family in this context. She was a guest, not a permanent member of the household. Patricia tried to soften the blow. "We thought maybe by then you'd have found your own place, Jen. You've been here 6 months now." Jennifer's face went pale, then red. She stood up from the table without a word and went to her room. Nobody followed her. In her mind, that moment confirmed everything she had been thinking. They didn't want her. They had never wanted her. She was nothing but a burden, an embarrassment, a failure they tolerated out of obligation. That night, lying in the guest room that she knew they wanted to reclaim, Jennifer made a decision. If they didn't want her in their perfect little family, then they wouldn't have a family at all. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer began to plan. She researched, she prepared, and she waited for the right moment. She had always been the invisible one, the one nobody paid attention to. That invisibility, she realized, could be her greatest weapon. On November 7th, Richard mentioned at dinner that he had an important client meeting the next morning and would be leaving early. Patricia said she had a church committee meeting that evening, but would be home by 9. Emily was planning to spend the afternoon at the library working on job applications. Jennifer listened to all of this, nodding and smiling, while her mind worked through the final details of her plan. Tomorrow would be the day. Tomorrow, she would make them understand what they had done to her. November 8th dawned gray and cold. Richard left for work at 7:30 in the morning. Patricia was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, humming along to a song on the radio. Emily was still asleep upstairs. Jennifer came down just before 8, earlier than usual. "Good morning," Patricia said cheerfully. "Coffee's ready." Jennifer poured herself a cup and sat at the kitchen table, watching her sister move around the familiar space. "Patricia," she said quietly, "can we talk?" "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about finding my own place." Patricia turned, relief evident on her face. "Oh, Jen, I'm so glad. I know it's been hard, but I really think it's time for you to start rebuilding your own life." "You're right," Jennifer said. "It is time." What happened next would be described later by forensic psychologist Dr. Rebecca Chen as a complete psychological break. Jennifer had spent weeks nurturing her rage, feeding her resentment, until it consumed everything else inside her. She had purchased a knife from a sporting goods store 3 days earlier, paying cash and wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. She had hidden it in her room, wrapped in an old towel at the back of her closet. And now, as Patricia turned back to the stove, Jennifer went upstairs to retrieve it. Emily was just waking up when Jennifer entered her room. "Aunt Jen," Emily said groggily, "what are you doing?" Those were the last words Emily Morrison ever spoke. The attack was swift and brutal. By the time Patricia heard her daughter's screams and ran upstairs, it was already too late. Patricia tried to fight back, tried to protect her child, but Jennifer was beyond reason now. The rage that had been building for months, for years, for her entire life, finally had an outlet. When Richard Morrison came home that evening, Having cut his client meeting short because his wife hadn't answered any of his calls, he found his family destroyed. Emily and Patricia were in Emily's bedroom. The scene was so horrific that the first responding officers would need counseling for months afterward. But Jennifer wasn't done. She had been waiting for Richard, sitting in the living room, still holding the knife. When he opened the door and called out for his wife, Jennifer stood up. "They're upstairs," she said calmly. "They're not going to make you feel bad anymore." Richard stared at his sister-in-law, not understanding. "What? Jennifer, what are you talking about?" "You are going to kick me out, all of you. You made me feel like nothing. Like I didn't belong anywhere." The realization of what had happened hit Richard like a physical blow. He turned to run upstairs to check on his family, and that's when Jennifer attacked him. But Richard was bigger and stronger. They struggled, crashing through the living room, knocking over furniture. Richard managed to grab Jennifer's wrist, trying to force the knife away. That's when Jennifer screamed. It was a sound of pure animal rage, of all the years of disappointment and failure and resentment finally erupting. She bit Richard's hand, and when he reflexively let go, she stabbed him in the chest. Richard collapsed against the wall, blood spreading across his white dress shirt. Jennifer stood over him, breathing hard, the knife still in her hand. And then, as the rage finally began to ebb, she realized what she had done. Because she dropped the knife, she backed away, staring at her hands, at the blood, at Richard's body, and then she did something unexpected. She picked up the phone and called 911. "I need help," she said, her voice eerily calm. "There's been an accident at 2847 Maple Grove Drive." When Detective Martinez and Officer Cooper arrived, they found Jennifer sitting on the front porch, her clothes covered in blood, rocking back and forth. She looked up at them with empty eyes. "I had to do it," she said. "They were going to throw me away, like garbage, like I didn't matter." The investigation that followed was straightforward in terms of evidence. Jennifer had made no attempt to hide what she had done. Her fingerprints were on the knife. The blood evidence clearly showed the sequence of events. There were no other suspects, and no mysteries to unravel. But understanding why was more complicated. How could a woman murder her own sister, her niece, her brother-in-law? What could possibly justify such horror? Dr. Rebecca Chen, the forensic psychologist assigned to evaluate Jennifer, spent hours interviewing her. What she found was a woman who had spent her entire life feeling inadequate, feeling invisible, feeling less than. Every success Patricia had achieved, every milestone Emily had reached, had been like a knife twisting in Jennifer's gut. During their sessions, Jennifer would talk about growing up in Patricia's shadow, how their parents had always praised Patricia's achievements while dismissing Jennifer's struggles, how Patricia had been the homecoming queen while Jennifer sat alone in the library, how Patricia had married a successful man while Jennifer's relationships always seemed to fall apart. She had constructed a narrative in her mind, Dr. Chen explained later at the trial. In that narrative, her family wasn't trying to help her. They were keeping her down, making her feel worthless, preparing to discard her when she was no longer useful. The reality didn't matter. Her perception had become her reality. Dr. Chen's testimony revealed disturbing patterns in Jennifer's thinking. She had kept a journal during her 6 months living with the Morrisons. In it, she wrote page after page of grievances, real and imagined. Patricia had looked at her with pity. Emily had rolled her eyes when Jennifer spoke. Richard had sighed when she entered a room. In every small interaction was filtered through Jennifer's lens of resentment and transformed into evidence of their contempt for her. The journal also contained fantasies of revenge. At first, they were relatively harmless, imagining Patricia's perfect life falling apart, Emily failing at her job search. But as the weeks went by, the fantasies grew darker. Jennifer wrote about the family begging her forgiveness, about making them understand how much they had hurt her. And in the final entries, written just days before the murders, the fantasies turned explicitly violent. Jennifer's mental state at the time of the murders became the center of the legal battle. Her public defender argued that she was not guilty by reason of insanity, that she had experienced a psychotic break and was not in control of her actions. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Rhodes, argued that Jennifer's actions showed planning and premeditation. She had bought the knife days in advance. She had waited for the right moment. She had known exactly what she was doing. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and people from the Morrison family's church and community who couldn't believe that someone they had welcomed into their homes could be capable of such evil. Jennifer herself seemed attached during much of the trial. She sat quietly at the defense table, occasionally wiping away tears, but mostly staring at nothing. When asked if she wanted to testify in her own defense, she declined. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before reaching a verdict. Guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The room erupted in a mix of sobs and cheers. Jennifer showed no reaction. At sentencing, the judge addressed Jennifer directly. "You have committed an act of unspeakable cruelty," he said. "You destroyed a family that tried to help you. You took 3 innocent lives because of your own selfish rage and resentment. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Jennifer was led away in handcuffs. She would spend the rest of her life in a California state prison. A woman who had destroyed everything because she couldn't bear to feel like a failure anymore. The Morrison family's house on Maple Grove Drive stood empty for nearly a year before finally being sold. The new owners had no idea of its history. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though the trauma of what happened never fully faded. From the end, Jennifer Hayes had gotten what she thought she wanted. She had made sure that if she couldn't be part of the Morrison family's perfect life, there would be no perfect life at all. But in destroying them, she had also destroyed herself. She had become exactly what she feared most, someone who truly didn't matter, locked away and forgotten, remembered only as a monster. The case of Jennifer Hayes serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers or random violence. Sometimes it comes from the people we invite into our homes, the family members we try to help, the ones we think we know but really don't know at all. And sometimes the most ordinary resentments, left to fester and grow in the dark, can transform into something unspeakably evil. 3 lives lost, 1 family destroyed, all because someone couldn't accept that they were responsible for their own happiness, their own success, their own life. Jennifer Hayes will spend the rest of her days behind bars, but the real prison, The one she built for herself with years of resentment and self-pity had locked her in long before she ever picked up that knife.